Things have taken a turn in the New York Islanders' search for the next general manager of the franchise, as we now have confirmation that a very experienced and polarizing figure will be getting an interview from the New York Islanders. And this is definitely notable because this figure's name is very different than the previous figures that we already know will be getting interviews for the position. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Islanders Digest, but before we do that, I want to thank all 75 of you who have already subscribed to the channel. We appreciate all the support here at Islanders Digest, and it really helps us make more videos on the Islanders as we cover this very busy offseason. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and let's get right into talking about this figure. Now, Chris Botta tweeted, "It is confirmed that amongst the many people who are planning to meet soon with the New York Islanders and talk about a new leadership position, one of them will in fact be Marc Bergevin." And this is very interesting. First, I do want to say Chris Botta is very reputable when it comes to talking about the New York Islanders and giving insider information. He actually is one of the first people who tweeted that there was some sort of discourse going on in the Islanders organization before Lou Lamoriello got let go. He was saying that people were expecting there to be open positions. He didn't confirm that it would be Lou Lamoriello going, but it shows that he knows stuff that is going on within the organization. And it makes a lot of sense that the New York Islanders are interviewing Marc Bergevin. That on itself is not really a shock. I mean, this is a man with so much experience, but from the names we've had confirmed so far, it was mostly newer GMs, people who are assistant GMs such as Kate Madigan, who have never been a GM before, but who have plenty of experience in other roles. There were several other names like this, but we didn't have, even though we did have a lot of rumors about the big names, such as Marc Bergevin, such as Ken Holland, we have not had an official report on them until now. So I think now is the perfect time to really talk about whether or not it makes sense for the Islanders to bring in Marc Bergevin for the role of general manager or president of the New York Islanders, because I do want to note really quickly that Chris Botta says leadership team. He doesn't necessarily say GM. Perhaps Marc Bergevin, especially with his experience in the NHL, he's 58 years old now, perhaps he wants to be the president or perhaps he wants to be the GM. Considering how his last role as GM with the Montreal Canadiens went, I would not be surprised if he wants another chance to try again. And we're going to talk about whether or not that makes sense, because the more I think about it, I'm divided on whether or not Marc Bergevin would be a good GM with the New York Islanders. On one hand, he made a lot of mistakes with the Montreal Canadiens. I think all Canadian fans would tell you that. But after that, he's now working as a senior advisor to the Los Angeles Kings, to Rob Blake, who will also be a candidate the Islanders will likely get a chance to speak to once the season ends for the Kings. That could be tonight. Obviously, you're not going to get a chance to interview him while this season is still going on and he's still under contract. Although I will note, it is pretty interesting that we already know that the Islanders will be interviewing Marc Bergevin, since he is also with the Kings. I guess since he's not the current GM, they've already given him permission to talk to the New York Islanders. I'm not exactly sure how that works. I mean, when we found out about Kate Madigan, she was also still with the Devils. Devils are now eliminated, but it just goes to show, you know, it's interesting with what candidates you're allowed to speak to and which candidates you're not allowed to speak to while the playoffs are going on. And that is definitely going to play a factor into this search. But now that we know that Marc Bergevin is being interviewed for the job, I really want to talk about some of his moves. I mean, as we said, he was the GM of the Montreal Canadiens, made a lot of mistakes. But I will say, in the time that he's been with the Kings have been a team that has really embraced a youth movement, something that Islander fans definitely want. And I will note, whoever is chosen to be the next general manager of the New York Islanders, we're obviously going to have first-hand reactions. Like, there are some candidates we're going to be more happy about than others, but I will say, until we see what moves they make with this team, I don't think it'll be fair to judge this general manager just based on their name and based on their resume. We should judge them based on what they do with the New York Islanders. With a candidate like Marc Bergevin, I think the question really is, can Marc Bergevin change in his second time as a GM? And there definitely is a chance he can. We're going to talk about some of his good moves and some of his mistakes. Now, later on in his career as GM, he made one of the best moves he made as the GM of the Montreal Canadiens. Hasn't really gotten credit for it because Suzuki has really taken off once he was no longer the GM. But the trade for Pacioretty, for Tatar, and Suzuki, also getting a second-round pick from the Vegas Golden Knights, absolutely incredible value, especially when Pacioretty had already forced the Montreal Canadiens to move him. And when it comes to Marc Bergevin, one thing you can't knock him for is he's not afraid to make bold trades. He's not afraid to move a player like Max Pacioretty, a fan favorite in Montreal, to get younger and to get more skilled. I mean, this was an incredible move. You got Tatar, a veteran, and Suzuki, who, looking now, absolute steal to land Suzuki from the Vegas Golden Knights. I'm sure they are regretting that now. And these are trades that are really incredible. We're going to talk about a couple other moves about what that Marc Bergevin has made that could really work for a team like the Islanders, who is looking to get younger. A player like Suzuki coming in a trade is exactly what the Islanders need right now. The issue is there have also been some moves that are questionable, and the question is, will Marc Bergevin take trades like this and learn from them, and also learn from his mistakes if he is chosen to be the next GM or even president of the New York Islanders? Some people seem to think that if you put somebody as the president, they're not going to have any decision-making power when it comes to these roster moves. That's not the case. I mean, the GM will have more power, at least to do like daily tasks, but the president is still going to have a huge part of those considerations, which is why, even though I do think it would be a good idea to get somebody experienced as a president for the New York Islanders, it's why I think hiring somebody like Ken Holland would be a great mistake, because even if somebody like Ken Holland brings in a guy like Matthew Darsh, you're still going to have Ken Holland at the top. Bergevin, on the other hand, I think he is somebody who could work as a president or a GM. So we're talking about more of these moves. There are other examples of him being really good at his job. I mean, the Petrie trade for Montreal was actually incredible. They got Jeff Petrie for a second and a fifth round pick. Absolutely nothing in terms of what Petrie was for the Montreal Canadiens. Insane value, and this just shows he is good at evaluating talent, and this is something the Islanders are going to need to do, because not every player that comes to the Islanders is going to have to come, is going to be able to come from drafting. If the plan for the Islanders is to replace the entire team by drafting more younger players, this is going to take 10 years. This is not realistic. Yes, you're going to have to draft some key players, and that is really where my concern with Marc Bergevin begins, but this just shows Marc Bergevin is able to make really good trades and merely make bold trades. And that is also a concern I have with him. Sometimes he just gets too bold. We have a couple more good moves before we get to some of the more concerning moves. And moves like this can also help the Islanders. I mean, Toffoli was a great value signing for them. And the Islanders are going to have to find value signings in free agency. I know everyone always talks about the big fish, but the way to really win free agency is finding value like Tyler Toffoli on a $4.25 million contract. That is where you find value. I mean, look, 28 goals for $4.25 million. That is where games are won. It's not won by getting $14 million players, because that also hinders the rest of your lineup. Sure, if you can sign a big fish, you do it, but there is value in signings like this. And then also, what's good about Bergevin is he's not afraid to make big moves. I mean, that Subban for Weber trade was absolutely insane. The same thing with the Pacioretty trade. He is not afraid to trade big players if he thinks it can work. The issue is some of those trades have not worked. I mean, his Dvorak trade was an absolute disaster. Don't know what he was thinking, giving up a first-round pick for Dvorak. And there have been also some other really head-scratching trades. I mean, Sergachev, for the record, drafting Sergachev was actually an example of a great move made by Bergevin, an example of why he could be really effective for the Islanders at finding talent in the draft. The issue is he traded him for Drouin, which at the time was kind of a head-scratcher, and now we see it didn't work out. Sure, Drouin was seen in more high regards back in the day, but even then, trading a defenseman like Sergachev, you don't do it. And these are some examples of moves that show that, yes, Marc Bergevin is bold, but sometimes that is not beneficial for the teams. And some other examples of mistakes Bergevin has made is he has also signed bad contracts in free agents. The Alzner contract was an absolute disaster a few years ago, but complete mess of a contract, and really caused issues down the line for a couple years for the Montreal Canadiens. And then Kotkaniemi, what a brutal pick, third overall. I give credit where credit's due for making swings, but this was a swing and a miss. I mean, how can you draft Kotkaniemi when other players such as Quinn Hughes are still available? It's a mixed bag. And sure, Kotkaniemi is not a complete bust. They did lose him to the Carolina Hurricanes, not matching an offer sheet which they were right not to match. I mean, it was way too much money for Kotkaniemi. Carolina was trying to get revenge for the offer sheet to Sebastian Aho, which I will say was actually a really good move, even though it did not pan out for Montreal. That's the type of example of a swing you like to see. And all this compilation of things really makes Marc Bergevin a complex figure when it comes to the next GM of the New York Islanders. I think he's a really interesting candidate because if you're getting what he did in Montreal, I think you're going to be very disappointed. But if he has taken some time to reflect after moving on from that position, especially now that he's with the Kings, and really reevaluated some of his philosophies and perhaps taken some of the best of what he's learned in the new system and still holding on to some of the things he did right, I do think there's a lot of value in a potential GM who can learn from their mistakes and do better the second time, rather than someone who's learning on the fly and perhaps making those mistakes for the first time with the New York Islanders. That being said, I'd love to know what you think about Marc Bergevin in the comments. Do you want to see him be the next GM or president of the New York Islanders? If not, let me know in the comments what candidate you want to see be the next general manager of the New York Islanders. As always, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. My name is Patrick Nilan. This is Islanders Digest. Let's go, Islanders.